On Tech News Today, Apple's making big screen changes for its future big iPhones. Google is driving the self-driving car market and talking to automakers about getting on board. And Google finally sells glass to the public. And Samsung isn't far behind with a glass product all its own. All that and more coming up right now.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Tech News Today is provided by CashFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Tech News Today for Wednesday, May 14th, 2014. This episode is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform that makes it fast and easy to create your own professional website or online portfolio. For a free 2-week trial and 10% off, go to squarespace.com and use the offer code TNT. Welcome to Tech News Today. I'm Mike Elgin.
I'm Jason Howell.
Tech News Today explores the big stories of the day with some of the world's best journalists. Our guest co-anchor today is Katie Benner, a reporter for the newish technology news site The Information. Welcome, Katie.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, we're so glad you're here. And, you know, today is a special day in Silicon Valley. Today is Mark Zuckerberg's 30th birthday. So he's no longer the richest person under 30. What do you think about that?
Wow, in mourning.
Yeah. He once said when he was 22 years old on stage at some tech conference that you should never hire somebody who's over the age of 30 because 30-year-olds and older are too slow and they have families and children and, you know, they're too busy and preoccupied to be hireable. So now I assume he's going to resign immediately.
Of course, you just scooped him. Yeah, wow, exactly. Congratulations. Well,
let's get right to the news. Apple is testing a screen for the iPhone 6 that has an ultra-high resolution of 1704 by 960, according to a report by Mark Gurman on 9 to 5 Mac. And Mark Gurman, of course, is a senior editor for that publication, and he is here to tell us more about this story. Welcome, Mark.
Hi, thanks for having me again.
So glad to have you again. We had you on yesterday. Apple is expected or rumored to be working on an iPhone 6 that's about the size of the iPhone 5, plus a bigger one. Do you think that they would use this higher resolution screen on both of them or just the big one?
So what we're hearing is that they're testing, like you said, a more dense, high-resolution panel with a resolution of 1704 by 960, which is a big leap over the 1136 by 640 of the iPhone 5, 5C, and 5S. And right now, Apple's working on a 4.7-inch phone and a 5.5-inch phone. And so it would make a lot of sense if they use that new 1704 by 960 resolution on both phones, which would give developers much less work to do. And actually, if they use that same resolution on both of those bigger phones, both phones would actually have better clarity and more denser screens than any past iPhone or even the current iPhone. So it would be a good move for Apple, for customers and developers.
Now, Apple tends to be much more locked down in terms of screen size than Android, of course, since Apple makes all the hardware for the iOS platform. Wouldn't it make more sense, or at least be a lot easier for developers if Apple simply stuck with the resolution of 1136 by 640?
Yes, technically, naturally it would be easier because that would require absolutely no changes for developers. But what that would do is that would make the screen less dense, less sharp. It would probably fall below the 300 pixels per inch Retina threshold that Steve Jobs and Apple marketing came up with back in 2010 for the iPhone 4. And so Apple's all about giving the best experience for the customer, and reducing the density would make the phone less comparable to some of the higher end Android phones on the market. And the route that they're actually taking by making the screen bigger will not require developers to put in that much work. It's going to be minimal work for developers.
Now, we have a question from our question engine that basically asks if what Apple is doing is a response. Are they following Samsung here? I mean, Samsung's Galaxy S5 has a 1920 by 1080 screen. So even the resolution you're reporting is a lower resolution than what's already out there. Do you think they're sort of scrambling to catch up with Samsung, or is this just the natural evolution of the iPhone?
Well, I think it's a mix of both, but probably leaning towards more on following the market trends. Samsung came out a couple of years ago and really showed that people care about having an iPhone or a phone with a large display that they can fit in your pocket or your purse. That's much bigger than what an iPhone offers. For years, Apple has been talking about why the iPhone 4-inch screen is perfect for one-hand usage with your thumb. But if the market is telling Apple otherwise, Apple's going to have to shift to the market if they don't want to risk being left behind by Samsung and their massive growth over the last few years. At the same time, making a bigger screen is a natural evolution for Apple as people really focus on, post PCs and tablets and smartphones.
Now, you reported that Apple's planning a pixel tripling mode. Can you tell us about that? Is that just a way to get legacy apps to look good on this new resolution?
Right. So pixel tripling is basically the evolution of the Retina display. When Apple announced the iPhone 4 back in 2010, they were transitioning from the iPhone screen before then. And so what they did to go Retina is they doubled the amount of pixels in the screen, but kept the same amount of screen space. So what pixel tripling would be doing is instead of doubling like they did with the original Retina display, they're going to be tripling the size of the images. So it scales from the iPhone 5's screen ratio to this new bigger phone. So basically that allows developers to easily update their image assets within their applications to give a better experience for the customer, better marketing for Apple, and easier work on the development side of things.
Someone in the question engine using the name The Fixer in St. Paul, Minnesota, is asking if this will affect battery life. Do you think this will give them new battery life headaches?
So what we're hearing is that one of the major new components of the iPhone is this new A8 system on a chip, which is an iteration of the Apple-built processor. And what they're really focusing on this year is performance and battery life efficiency. So Apple's well aware of what they're going to need to do to keep the iPhone battery life strong in a world with a higher resolution screen. So Apple is well aware of this, and they're working on that. And that's a big focus for this phone. Additionally, the phone is going to be bigger yet thinner, and that gives them more room to fit a battery pack. They can thin it out and push it across the whole phone. So I think it's going to balance out well. Apple really focuses on the big picture. And just like we saw with the iPads, they're willing to take any route possible to enhance the product's screen without affecting the battery life.
Now, Katie Benner, are you an iPhone user, and to what extent are you impressed, or do you not care about the super high resolution screens? Is that something you use to choose what kind of phone you buy?
I'm an Apple devotee only because it works with all of my other devices, so I'm locked in. I'm a good customer for them, and I don't know how to use anything else. So they have me for life. And so when I see something like these screen changes and pixel tripling, what I'm wondering is, Mark, for example, does this mean that I'm going to have to go out and buy a new phone? Does this mean, will it have any effect on the way that I use my device? And then also, if I'm an investor in Apple, how does this change the game for the company? Does this really do anything, these sort of incremental tech changes, when people are looking for a great wearable device coming out of these guys, a TV or something else?
Sure, absolutely. So the first question, will it affect your current phone? Not immediately. I think within a couple years from now, developers may start only building their applications to be able to run on the bigger iPhone screens. But I think for the next few years, you'll be safe. And maybe within a couple of years from now, you'll have an upgrade anyways. I mean, if you want the new screen and the new features, better battery life, you'll probably want to get the new phone. But other than that, I wouldn't be concerned. In terms of an investor standpoint, I think investors have been looking for the next big thing from Apple for a while. They've been looking for bigger screens in order to conquer Samsung and really match Samsung's devices. So I think from an investor standpoint, this is a fantastic move from Apple.
One last question, Mark Gurman. Do you think this information is going to be rolled out at WWDC?
No, Apple typically does not announce hardware initiatives early. We're hearing that the new phone will be announced around September, toward the fall of this year. But what we do understand is that Apple has been working on new tools for app developers called multi-resolution mode. And those tools might be hinted at or rolled out in some form or another at WWDC. And what these tools are going to do are they're going to allow developers to better create applications that can work on multiple screen resolutions. See, this new iPhone with the bigger screen and the new resolution is just the beginning of what Apple's going to be doing over the next couple of years. They're going to be rolling out lots of new iOS devices that run the iPhone, iPad operating system at tons of different resolutions. So Apple's work on the technology for both on the hardware and software is going to be really important for the next few years down the road.
Well, now, Mark Gurman, we try to have you on the show every time you have a big scoop, so we'll be seeing you tomorrow.
Yes, maybe.
All right, Mark Gurman, I appreciate you coming on Tech News today.
Thanks a lot. Really appreciate it.
All right,
Thank you, Katie.
Mark Gurman is at 9to5mac.com and also on Twitter at Mark Gurman, Gurman. Well, in a sec, we're going to tell you about what's happening in the world of self-driving cars. And, of course, Google is at the middle of it all. But first, I want to tell you about Squarespace, the #1 place to build a website anywhere. I've been using it for 2 years. I think I first learned about it listening to Twit, listening to Leo advertise it on Twit. I tried it out, loved it. I've been building websites since the mid-'90s, and I was completely blown away by how easy it is and how beautiful the result is. Squarespace has 25 beautiful templates, and you can start with those and then customize them to your heart's content. But no matter what you build on Squarespace, it's going to look fantastic on a mobile device because Squarespace automatically resizes it for any size device. So if you're using an Android phone or an iPhone or a tablet or a desktop or a giant screen, no matter what size screen you're using, it'll automatically reconfigure itself to look native and perfect on that size screen. It's totally mobile ready, and it's also mobile ready for you as the owner of the website because you can use their metric app for iPhone and iPad to check your site stats and basically monitor your website even as you're out and about running around town as a mobile user. It's, of course, easy to use, but they have tech support by chat or email 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and e-commerce is available at all subscription plan levels. So if you want to sell something or raise money for your nonprofit or whatever, you can do that very quickly and easily with Squarespace. And it starts at just $8 a month. And that includes a free domain name if you sign up for a year. So start a free 2-week trial, free 2-week trial. You got to try this. It's really great if you haven't tried it. No credit card required, and you can start building your website immediately. When you decide to sign up for Squarespace, make sure you use the offer code TNT, and that'll get you 10% off the price. And we thank Squarespace for their support of tech news today. And remember that a better web awaits, and it starts with your new Squarespace website. Google is talking regularly with major car makers about bringing self-driving cars to market using Google's technology. That's right, they're talking to Detroit about self-driving cars. Google's even thought about designing its own car, according to a piece this morning in the Wall Street Journal. Now, Chris Davies is the executive editor at SlashGear, and he's here to tell us about this, and he's written about this extensively. Welcome, Chris.
Good morning, Mike. Morning, Katie.
Morning.
So the guy in charge of Google's self-driving car project, whose name is also Chris, his name is Chris Urmson, says self-driving cars will be on the road in about 6 years. Is he nuts, or is this a feasible timeline, do you think?
I think you have to look at it in terms of a gradation of the technology and what will be introduced when. I don't think within 6 years' time we're going to have cars that you can simply summon on your smartphone, get into, and ask them to take you anywhere and drop you off. I don't think that that is necessarily feasible. I think what we'll see is more autonomous technologies being introduced, which takes some of the stress out of driving, for instance, maybe if you're in a traffic jam.
There's already some level of that in some luxury cars now where if there's an accident detected, the car will apply the brakes for you and do minor swerving and so on. I don't know if you've seen the TV show Silicon Valley, which is produced by HBO. Have you seen that?
I have, yes.
Okay, did you see the most recent episode where the guy gets in a self-driving car? He gets in a self-driving car, for those of you who haven't seen it. He's one of the major characters. And it's owned by a person who's essentially runs a company that's pretty much a surrogate for Google. And they have, of course, a self-driving car, unlike the actual self-driving cars, which require by law to have a person in the driver's seat ready to grab the wheel if the thing freaks out. In the fictional version in the show Silicon Valley, there's no driver. So the guy gets in the back seat and he's on his way home, and all of a sudden somebody remotely reprograms it to go get in this container, shipping container, and then he ends up being shipped into the middle of the ocean. It's pretty funny. And it shows just how horrible these things could go if there was some kind of glitch. What are the remaining technical issues to prevent that kind of scenario or worse, bad accidents or we already have a situation now where, maps applications will lead you into the San Francisco Bay and so on. So what are the remaining technical challenges for self-driving cars to make them ready for prime time, do you think?
I think when you talk about maps, you make a really good point. One of the distinguishing factors of a lot of self-driving cars are things like the LiDAR laser array on the top of the car, the barrel-shaped thing, which is constantly scanning the road around it and picking up pedestrians or other road users. But actually, that's providing only a small percentage, perhaps, of the data that the self-driving cars are needing. So you also have to have very, very good mapping knowledge of what kind of road you're on, the kind of the topography of the road, and what kind of junctions you're coming up to. And the mapping data that you see at the moment on things like Google Maps, that's not precise enough. You know, that's a point-to-point thing. It doesn't tell you how many lanes there are on the road. It doesn't tell you what kind of road necessarily it is, or where the curbs are, or if there aren't curbs. It doesn't tell you where driveways are. So there's an awful lot of effort that's kind of still needed to bring these more high-definition maps, you could say, to self-driving cars, that they'll really need to understand where they're going.
Yeah, Google unveiled more information about how their self-driving car works, and it includes the ability for these cars to simultaneously understand, hundreds of individual things, and it understands what they are and what they do. For example, it knows when somebody's on a bicycle that's a bicycle rider, and they can even detect hand signals. So if a bicycle rider gives the left turn signal, which most riders don't, Google's self-driving car technology can understand that gesture and behave accordingly. Now, you met recently with Nokia's team for self-driving car mapping technology. What do they tell you about where the future of self-driving cars is headed?
Well, it's the Nokia Here team. So it's one of the teams that Nokia has kind of been left with after selling off its smartphone business to Microsoft recently. And what they're doing is they're creating just these kind of HD maps, and they call it Maps HD, which take into account a lot more of the granular detail of the roadways. And so that's what allows these self-driving cars that Nokia won't be producing themselves, but they supply an awful lot of mapping data to car companies. They'll be using that mapping data to figure out how a self-driving car might plan, not just for the junction ahead that the sensors on board can see, but what's coming around the corner. I think what's really interesting is from reading some of the reports from journalists like Times' Harry McCracken, who went out in the Google cars yesterday, hearing that Google is taking quite a different approach to sort of the style of driving, perhaps, compared to what Nokia were talking to me about, and this idea of how computerized should a car feel if it's driving itself, and how comfortable will people inside be.
I'm very curious about this topic, and I'm wondering if you have any idea about the tone of the conversations between Google and the automakers. I think that from the car manufacturer's point of view, they're definitely interested in self-driving cars, but they always seem reluctant to say they're throwing their lot in with Google. They have, as Mike mentioned before, they've definitely come up with some technologies that are leading to self-driving cars of their own, like automatic braking and speed controls and safety measures and sensors. So what are these conversations like?
I think an awful lot of them obviously are going on behind closed doors, and I sadly haven't been able to be a fly on the wall in those. But from everything I'm hearing, it's a very cautious approach from the big car companies. They, as you say, are very interested. They're developing a lot of their own kind of autonomous technologies. So, for instance, Mercedes-Benz sent a self-driving S-Class across Germany last year using Nokia's mapping. BMW just today have been talking about their own kind of technologies for autonomous vehicles, or components for autonomous vehicles at least. And I know that in Europe, Renault Nissan are looking at how they can use self-driving cars to maybe take some of the stress out of dealing with traffic congestion. So the cars wouldn't drive themselves all the time, but they would drive themselves when they know that they're in a traffic jam and in slow-moving traffic, or in kind of urban freeways. They're very cautious, and a lot of that comes down to the legal implications of it. So, for instance, if a self-driving car comes into an accident, who's responsible for that? Because it's not clearly the person behind the dashboard, not even the wheel anymore. And if a self-driving car gets into an accident and has to make that decision between, say, does it save the pedestrian on the side of the road, or does it save the person inside the car? If it knows that only one of those people are likely to survive, who does it save? And who are the lawyers going to blame afterwards?
Sure. I think liability, I'm looking at the listener stream of questions coming in, and liability is the big one that keeps popping up again and again. And so I'm wondering, too, has there been any clarity around how insurers are going to deal with this, or is that still just totally up in the air?
I mean, it's still totally up in the air, to be honest with you. There hasn't been any sort of set consensus from insurers. We've seen, with the increase of some autonomous technologies in cars, like the automatic cruise control, which can even do things like keep to lanes and adjust the amount of distance between the cars around you, they still defer to the driver. The driver is always the buck stops with them. And I think at the moment that's how insurers like it, because that's a pretty clear situation. I don't know how soon it will be before we get to a situation where insurance companies understand who's liable and who's to blame. You know, we hear an awful lot of statistics from Google and others about how safe driving is going to be when self-driving cars are the dominant kind of road users, but there's going to be an awfully long overlap period where they're coexisting or trying to coexist with human drivers. And I'm not entirely sure who I'd trust more.
This whole question about whether the self-driving car should be programmed to save the people inside the car or go ahead and kill that person if it saves pedestrians or whatever has already to a certain extent been decided by consumer behavior. I think people want a car that will save themselves at the expense of others. I mean, after all, that's pretty much what the SUV phenomenon is about. An SUV, big, gigantic SUV is something that you buy so that you win in a crash, basically, that the people inside the car are safer and the people outside the car are less safe because the car is so big and heavy. It's an ugly fact, but it is a fact nonetheless that I think people tend to make those decisions. The question is, are consumers going to be making that decision? In other words, will you be able to buy a car that's skewed in one direction or another? Is that going to be on the list of features of the car? A horrible question to consider, but it's interesting that people are asking about. So, Chris Davies, let me ask you one more question, and this is really kind of a philosophical question. If it can be demonstrated that statistically self-driving cars are safer than human drivers, statistically, and in fact that's probably already the case, they're probably already safer than human drivers, isn't that enough data for us to just throw the switch and make them legal?
I think theoretically, maybe. I think if you look at, the way I always look at it is, if you looked at a car today and we didn't have cars already, and you proposed this idea that we would be driving around individually in these little armored containers with a combustion engine and bristling with bumpers and things at high speed, or, you know, driving them ourselves with no kind of overriding control system into communicating between us, I don't think that, you know, no government would say, oh yeah, that's a great idea, we'll definitely allow those. I think it's going to be really hard to move into this kind of new age of autonomous vehicles without taking into account what people are already doing and kind of what people's preferences are. I think the safety issue is only going to be one aspect of that. I think it's going to take an awful lot more than just saying, well, there will be fewer road accidents by introducing this technology. I think we have a long way to go, and a lot of that is about the kind of the comfort levels of drivers and lawmakers.
One of the things that is been brought up in the question engine by Jeffer in San Diego is the whole question of the ability of a driver to drive. A lot of people who can't drive currently could get around in self-driving cars, blind people, for example, disabled and so on. So that's a huge benefit for the self-driving car category to be developed, because it would enable a whole lot of mobility by a whole lot of people. Well, Chris Davies, I want to thank you for coming on Tech News today. Always a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you for having me. Have a great day.
Thank you. Chris Davies is, you can find Chris Davies at slashgear.com and also on Twitter at C_Davies. Well, Yahoo's bought a self-destructing messaging app called Blink. The app competed with Snapchat, Frankly, Confide, Wicker, but it will be shut down after the acquisition. That's right. The app itself will self-destruct, just like the messages that you send with it. Now, Katie Benner, this is an interesting story, in part because there's some question as to whether Yahoo bought the app or the company. The company is called Meh Labs, as in MEH Labs. Hilarious name for a company, but
unconvincing name.
Yeah, I mean, they're the ones. Yahoo didn't announce this. The people who own Blink announced it, and they said that Yahoo is buying Blink and the staff, including the founders, but they didn't say they're buying the company. The company also makes, and is probably better known for, another app that basically does location. Now, what do you think of this category? Do you think Yahoo's going to come out with a Snapchat type of app that's Yahoo branded?
Well, I think we need to back up for just a second and look at what Yahoo's doing. Meyer has said, we want to be a mobile-first company. So that includes things like Snapchat, and it also includes things like location. And I think she's bought about 40 companies since she took over as CEO, many for acqui-hires as well. So it wouldn't be a surprise if she bought this company simply to get the talent and to throw them into divisions where they are underserved divisions around mobile. I do think, though, that why wouldn't Yahoo want to create some sort of Snapchat disappearing text? Clearly, this is a category you're seeing it, whether it's with Secret or Whisper or these anonymous apps or the disappearing messages, that there's a way in which people want to be able to communicate online without it being part of their permanent record. You know, it's part of the phenomenon of technology sort of advanced far beyond where social norms, where we were comfortable with vis-a-vis social norms. And suddenly we all had this sort of online permanent life that has taken us by surprise as we've gotten older. We can ask Mark Zuckerberg about it now that he's 30. Maybe he's changed his mind about all of this.
Well, he's wiser now.
Even he says we can be anonymous on Facebook's platform now too. So there is a sense that it's not always good to have everything attributed to you forever and ever and ever. So in that way, you know, as a mobile first company or a company trying to be mobile first, trying to somehow be ahead of the curve when it's been behind for so long, you know, why not incorporate that? Again, though, we haven't really seen anything interesting come out of Yahoo's acquisitions. We haven't seen Tumblr be accretive to the bottom line. We haven't seen with all these acqui-hires anything truly stunning other than a weather app happen. So, you know, who knows?
That's a great point. And I'm going to give those of you a tip. I'm a Google Glass nerd, and the best self-destructing app on earth is Gmail combined with Google+. Here's how you do it. If you add somebody's email address to a Google+ post, they'll receive that post as an email. Now, it can sit in their inbox for weeks, and if they don't look at it, and even if they do look at it, you can still go in and delete the app right out of their inbox. You can even edit it, change it, whatever. It's a really powerful feature that people probably don't really want in the real world, because then they think they read something and they come back and the words are different than what they think they read, and it's problematic in that respect. But that's an awesomely powerful tip, and I'd like to see Google come out with a Snapchat-like thing that's built around Gmail and Google+. Well, speaking of Google, after more than a year of hype during its invitation-only Explorer beta program, Google Glass has quietly gone on sale to the general public in the United States. And do you hear that noise? That's the sound of nobody giving a rat's hind about this. $1,500 is a lot of money for something that is essentially, the train has kind of left the station on the current iteration of Google Glass. Now, we're expecting a new version of Google Glass, Katie Benner, later in the year, I think, and it'll probably be sleeker and more exciting, probably higher performance. But, you know, I remember when this first came out, I got in the Explorer program, and people were, you know, saying mean things about me because they were so jealous. They wanted it so badly and would do anything to get it. And nowadays, I don't really see that. Do you think the excitement over Google Glass is over?
You know, what were we just saying about technology and innovation moving faster than social norms and what's considered acceptable? I think that there are a lot of privacy issues around Google Glass. Hopefully the next version will do something to address that. That people don't like the idea that I don't know when I'm being recorded. I don't really know. You know, the small issue is that when people wear Google Glass, it is oddly distracting to talk to them, and it does seem like they're not paying attention, and that can be annoying. The larger issue being, when am I being recorded? What's going on? We just recently did an interview with Oscar Salazar. He was a very early Uber employee. He helped create the software over there. He does a lot of work with governments and nonprofits, and he has a lot to say around privacy. And he thought that Google Glass was a great example of that very conflict and controversy. You know, what if you walk into the locker room and somebody's wearing their Google Glass? Like, is that okay? What are the rules around that? What are the socially acceptable rules? Are we as a society going to change and catch up? So I think that's sort of something underlying the adoption of Google Glass that has to be resolved. And then $1,500, like that's my rent. So it has to be a much more convincing product, a much better looking product, and a much more sort of interesting product, I think, than it is right now for it to be worth that kind of money.
I feel like what we're seeing right now with this being $1,500 but still open to everyone means that we have quite a ways to go before we see the next iteration of Glass. Because if they were to come out in the next couple of months with a much lower cost one, people want to see Glass in the $200 to $300 price range. $1,500 to $200 to $300, I mean, even a couple of months from now would upset a lot of people based on the fact that they just dropped, you know, like you said, a month's rent on technology that soon after would be so much less expensive. I think it's a ways out. If we're going to see a next iteration, man, maybe it's even longer than the end of this year. Maybe it's into next year. Who knows? And
I think that the product's not appealing enough for $1,500 to be a price point that anybody will pay. I think that adoption will come when they get that $200 price point, and then people will start bending on how annoyed they are by it, and they'll start bending on their outrage over privacy issues, because it'll be cheap and they'll want to try it, and that will help. That will sort of bridge that gap. But at $1,500, I mean, you're just not going to see that.
And Robert Bigelow in the chat room says that parents with small children will want Google Glass and with its camera. And of course, Jason, you recorded your baby's first steps. You happen to be wearing Google Glass when this happened, and now for all time you will have really high quality video of this major event. I mean, who can say that they have that recorded?
I know, and I lucked out, and I was hoping that it would happen, and it all timed perfectly, and that was an amazing experience, and I will absolutely cherish the fact that I have that. Having said that, would I pay $1,500 for that capability? I don't know. I mean, in looking back on it, hey, it's priceless to have that footage and everything. But I don't think most people would spend $1,500 just for camera capabilities of Google Glass. As cool as it is, it's got to come down significantly in cost.
And it's important to note that the Google Glass gets all the publicity, but there are going to be a wide range of devices, some with cameras, some without cameras, others far more invasive than Google Glass, others not invasive at all. So it's going to be a wide open category. I think the cheapest smart glass headset is going to be under $100, and it will just give you blinking lights for notification. That's the low end. The high end is going to be ultra high resolution that covers both your eyes with an augmented reality. And here we go. Here is the famous first steps recorded through Jason's Google Glass.
Yeah, we'll skip
What a great shot!
And
a third, a fourth. A fifth, a sixth.
And I mean, she connects with me, right? Her eyes are right at my eyes. She doesn't think about the black slab that's blocking us. So there's a lot of potential in glass. And things like this make new parents or parents with young kids say, oh man, I want that, because that's kind of the missing link in technology today, is being able to capture these things without the technology getting in the way. And glass is great for that, but it's just too expensive.
I think the first picture, just one more thing on Google Glass and parenting, that really captured people's imaginations and made them realize, wait a minute, this is kind of a new art form, because you feel like the person that you're looking at, you see it through their eyes. It's a slightly different thing. And that's when Gina Trapani, who's a host of numerous shows on Twit, took a picture of her new baby. And it was just a really breathtakingly beautiful photograph. And you couldn't take it if you were using a hand with a camera. The baby was looking right into the eyes of the camera, it looked like. So that was really cool. It's a compelling use. But again, Google Glass is not a camera, and that's how people talk about it, like it's a camera. The camera is the least interesting thing about Google Glass, in my opinion. Well, in related news, a publication called Business Korea reports that Samsung's competitor to Google Glass, which is called Gear Glass, will ship this fall. And I don't have high hopes that Samsung is really going to make a great product. Their first watch was terrible, so I'm not so sure this will be great, but I'll bet you it's going to be cheaper than $1,500.
Sure, and maybe that price point will be what makes it sort of a success, in quotes, is that people will try it. They'll just be curious, and if they can for a couple $100, why not?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the Internet of Things and wearable computing will be mainstream by 2025. That sounds like it's far into the future, but that's just a little over 10 years. And this mainstreaming will happen, according to a new report by Pew Research Center and Elon University. Damon Brown wrote a really interesting story on the Al Jazeera America website and joins us this morning to put this report into context. Welcome, Damon Brown.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So before we get into this report, you wrote a book called Porn and Pong, How Grand Theft Auto, Tomb Raider, and Other Sexy Games Changed Our Culture. How did I miss that book? That sounds like a great book.
It was a lot of fun. I spent about 5 years on it. It was my first major book. And it was basically taking technology and saying that we can use this to create a context for the rest of our world. And hopefully I succeeded with Porn and Pong. And I actually had a book that came out just about a year ago on TED Books. And that was called Our Virtual Shadow, Why We're Obsessed with Documenting Our Lives Online, which I'm actually a new father, so I can understand where Jason's coming from. And that kind of all ties together with the Internet of Things. And it was so interesting with the Pew report saying that by 2025, basically all our devices are going to be connected. The example I give in the Al Jazeera story is that imagine you're using an electronic toothbrush, which many of us are, and that toothbrush is smart enough to go ahead and know when it's been 6 months. It'll go ahead and say, let me look at your calendar, usually on Google, and say, when can we go ahead and set up a checkup for Damon? And then that calendar or that toothbrush might go and ping your dentist office. And the dentist office might say, okay, these times are available. And then the toothbrush automatically goes and puts it into your calendar. So that's like a really simple example of the Internet of Things. As the author of a new book called The Internet of Things, Sam Greengard, said, it's essentially machines talking to each other without our intervention, which is both exciting and scary at the same time.
And of course, the really advanced version in the future of the future toothbrush is one that has a drill in it. We'll go ahead and just do the dentistry right there as you're brushing your teeth. Won't that be
exactly
exciting?
With nanobots and cool stuff like that? I'm sure that we've seen in Total Recall and other 80s movies.
Exactly. Now, Damon Brown, we talk a lot about the Internet of Things.
Yeah.
How do you define it? I think a lot of people are not clear on what the Internet of Things is exactly.
Sure. It's as simple as saying that each device being able to be connected through internet, through Bluetooth, through cell connections, and I'm sure other connections that we'll have in the future that aren't out yet. And it's the ability for those machines to talk to each other. Sometimes those machines actually talk to us, but that's not much different than what happens today. So the real future of the Internet of Things is, like I was saying, your toothbrush being able to talk to your refrigerator and go ahead and say, remind Damon to stay away from the oranges because the acid's hurting his teeth. Things of that nature,
Yeah.
And so the ability to have those conversations on a higher level without you having to intervene. When you guys were just talking about Google Glass, I think that's what Google's always been trying to do. So I really do think we should watch them in this space because they're really focusing on, whether it's Google Now or other products, basically taking us out of the equation and saying we can actually go and create our own conversations without being involved.
Oh my gosh, this is terrifying. I spent my whole life wanting to grow up so that my mom wouldn't tell me what to do, and now my refrigerator's going to tell me what to do. This is not good.
I understand, Katie. That's an unfortunate.
Well, I'm personally not super optimistic about the Internet of Things for the following reason. When the Internet emerged, we had all these standards that were set in stone before private companies, for-profit companies got their hands into it. And so we have standards even to this day that make everything talk to each other. In the Internet of Things, this category is emerging in a world where you have all these powerful vested interests. And everybody from Google to Apple to you name it, all these companies are going to want to drive the standards for the Internet of Things. So how are we going to get to a world of standards where these devices can really talk to each other, all of them, instead of just, you have to have only the Google devices talk to the Google devices and the Apple devices talk to the Apple devices. How are we going to reach this nirvana of standards for the Internet of Things?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a natural attrition. The challenge here, like I wrote about that in Porn and Pong, where you're going back to VHS and beta. And, oh, thank you, VHS and beta, and all the challenges with that, and how, in that case, pornography ended up playing a big part as far as why we end up using VHS versus beta, even though the technology with beta was a lot better. I think we're going to see the same thing. And in that case, with VCR, it was Sony and it was Panasonic against each other. Now we're seeing, like you said, Apple, we're seeing Google, like the Nest thermostat system is one of the best early examples of the Internet of Things, where it'll automatically go and adjust the temperature based on your habits, your needs. It'll talk to other parts of your house. That's a really good example. You see that they're actually getting more involved in the conglomerate side and are not independent anymore. And so we're going to see a lot more of that. I do think it's going to be a war on 2 or 3 different fronts. As they mentioned, when I talked to the folks at Pew, they considered it being an arms race as far as who can get control of the Internet of Things, whether it's the good guys and the bad guys, or Apple, Google, Microsoft, you name it. We're not really sure where it's going to go. I actually talked to a man on the street who's actually in there named Dan, and his idea was that he's thinking it's going to be chaos for quite a few years. And as a layman person, I think he's right. I think it's going to be a good 5 years where this is going to be insane. And finally, we'll get some type of organized standard. If that standard comes from the government, kind of like with the Internet protocols, so be it. If it ends up being more like the VHS versus beta battle, then that might be the case too. But we even see that with Google Glass and with the Samsung competitor, which crazy, it's going to come out in a couple weeks, I guess. You're already seeing that competition happen on other Internet of Things fronts. So I don't think that we should go ahead and assume it's going to be chaos forever. Just assume it's going to be chaos for I'd say the next 3 or 4 years. For right now, I'd say I'd be more in the hold category to kind of go and see how things shake out before you invest too much money in it.
Well, I can tell you right now, I'm not going to invest a penny in any of this for the foreseeable future, and I appreciate your optimism, and I also enjoyed your article, and I thank you for joining us today on Tech News Today. All right, Damon Brown is reachable at damonbrown.net and also on Twitter at BrownDamon, D-A-M-O-N. Well, a UK company called Autographer makes clip-on cameras that take pictures all day, giving you photographic memory of your life, literally photographic memory. The practice of recording everything for the purpose of total recall is called life logging. Well, now Autographer is partnering with fashion designer Lulu Guinness on a life logging handbag for women called the Archive Eyes. Okay, let's face it, this is a purse with a built-in spy camera. Okay? The handbag's 5-megapixel camera uses an extreme wide-angle lens to capture everything, and it takes up to 2,000 pictures a day. It ships July 30th and costs about $660. Katie Benner, I bet you can't wait to get your hands on this purse.
I am so excited. You know, this is one of these funny things, and I think that there have been a couple of luxury brand technology pairings happening lately. You saw Opening Ceremony working on wearable stuff. You've seen Diane von Furstenberg. I think she came out and she did some things with Google Glass. And I think there is a realization that in order to drive adoption, especially if you're going to charge bizarre amounts of money for a device, is to appeal to a high fashion, trend-setting crowd. And, you know, if people are willing to pay $800 to $1,400 for a pair of shoes, which is the going price for a pair of very high-end designer heels, maybe they will pay, you know, $1,500 or something like that for you know, for Google Glass, or $700 for a handbag that helps you spy on everybody around you. So I think that fusing fashion with these sort of high-end devices on the vanguard is probably not a terrible idea, at least just to get people to use them and see what they're like. But I myself would probably never have a life logging handbag.
I've never carried a purse myself, but I've noticed that women tend to take them into the bathroom with them. And I'm not sure the intelligence within these cameras can tell the difference between the ladies' room and just the world at large. And so it's yet another problem. But I think you're absolutely right, and you make a really great point. And it's a point that Apple really understands, that the fashion aspect, the personal identity aspect of gadgets is where the margins are, if nothing else. And that's why they've hired so many fashion-oriented people for their wearable device, their so-called iWatch program, in addition to medical people.
Sure, from Burberry, from all these high-end designers.
That's right, because without the fashion aspect, it all just becomes commoditized. There's no margins, and it's not a good business to get into. So,
you know, it's interesting. I was talking to a team from Samsung who had they were basically trying to figure out how do we create that emotional connection, and they were very perplexed. And I think that a lot of the, you know, a lot of the tech hardware community hasn't yet figured out that that is important. You know, if you look at Jawbone, if you look at what was happening around, you know, Nike's Field Band, these things are very ugly devices. And so they really only appeal to the early adopters of these devices, who tend to be men who don't care about what things look like. And so in order for things to be widely available and to be adopted and loved, that you have to start, you know, matching your product with people who have a different kind of expertise. Absolutely. And I totally agree with that. As for this purse, I don't see this taking the world by storm, but who knows? We'll see. It's definitely a first, and it's absolutely a first partnership by Autographer, and there are other devices like Autographer that I think are ripe for partnerships as well. So we'll see how that goes. Well, Katie Benner, that is the Tech News Today. I want to thank you for being our guest co-anchor today on Tech News Today. Thanks for having me. So glad to have you. You did a great job. The question engine, you're a big hit on the question engine. They're saying you're a great guest co-anchor, and I agree. So thank you so much for coming on. Thank you. It's been nice. All right. Well, you can subscribe to Tech News Today at twit.tv/TNT. You're not subscribed? What are you doing? You got to subscribe to Tech News Today. You can also go to YouTube at youtube.com/TechNewsToday, and also follow Twit's breaking news feed on Twitter. That's Twit News. Join our Google Plus community, and also circle our page by searching for Tech News Today on Google Plus. You'll find all of our locations there. Now, we want to hear from you, so comment on Twitter or Google Plus using the hashtag Tech News Today, or you can send us an email at tnt@twit.tv, or leave us voicemail by calling 260-TNT Show. Don't miss our evening newscast, Tech News Tonight at 4 p.m. Pacific tonight and every weeknight. My name is Mike Elgin. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow.